Welcome to Learning with Leaders. Our topic today is engaging your church. My guest today is Blue Van Dyke. Blue has an uncommon mix of international business experience, digital marketing experience, venture capital success, and executive pastoral leadership at one of the largest churches in the United States. That dynamic combination of tenure is actually exactly what gives Blue such a powerful and articulate position on church growth strategies. So we share that passion. But most importantly, Blue loves God. He and his amazing wife, Crystal, are dear friends of Grace and I, and I get smarter every time we spend time together. Blue, welcome to Learning from Leaders.
Phil, thank you very much for having me. I mean, you say that learning from leaders, I feel like I should just be watching and, rather than participating. You know very well that I've reached out to you on a number of occasions for advice and ideas. So thank you for having me. I feel humbled that I'm even participating, but just to be with you, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I mean that sincerely, and I'm excited about today for us just to have an exploration and conversation about leadership, but really church member engagement.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll delve into that a little bit as well. So tell me a little bit about your leadership story.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I wish I had this great story. I could say I started reading Maxwell when I was 3 or so. That's just not the case. I actually used to use business to fund my adventurous life, to be quite honest. So this is ironic. One of my first jobs out of grad school was with a German company, but here's what happened. So I was an exchange student, had an opportunity to go study abroad, both in high school and did a good chunk of my undergraduate at a German university. And I just fell in love with kind of the broader world perspective. Right. And so literally what I did is I started researching what are some of the biggest companies in Germany to get hired from. And that's a little bit about how I landed where I did. But I started out, like I said, I studied, abroad in Germany for a while, came back to the States, did an internship, came back here to do my MBA. So it's actually an MIM. It's a Master's in International Management. Think of an MBA, taught in a foreign language. That got me recruited by a big German company called Daimler-Benz. They're the parent company of Mercedes-Benz. And I got hired into what they called, it was like a black belt program. Do you remember when GE, Jack Welch had that thing, black belt program?
Yeah.
Well, the Jürgen Schrempp was the CEO at the time of Daimler, and he modeled it after Jack's black belt program. So the idea was every 9 months to a year, you got put in a different country, you're in a different, facet of the business. So it might be captive finance over here, or marketing over there, or sales over here. And so literally for the first 4 years, I just got rotated around the globe doing different projects. And the learning curve was, steep on that. One of those, though, I had a colleague of mine who was tasked with starting up Mercedes-Benz-USA.com, going out and getting one of the first internet sites built for it. That was my introduction into the agency that we had hired to do that. So anyways, through that introduction and through working with them on that, I actually jumped ship from the auto industry into what I'll call the digital advertising space. So this was late 90s, early 2000s. This was what I'd say is happening now with AI. Felt very similar to happening back then with the internet.
Right.
The internet was just born. People were trying to figure it out. Basically, we'd go out to companies and we'd get paid way too much money to develop really complicated websites for them, right? And figure out how they would use these things to communicate and message and target people and all of that stuff. Anyways, was there for about 8 years, ran that business. And if anybody, our age remembers the dot-com boom and bubble and bust out the other side, I lived through that whole experience. So the learning curve in and of itself of growing and coming back down and re-emerging, you could write a book just on those tales. Came out the bottom of that, I will tell you. So we were fortunate enough to kind of live through it and then exit and sell the business. It was a bit of a crazy time. I'm painting my leadership experience because sometimes it wasn't all what you would put on an Excel spreadsheet.
Right.
But during that time, my office, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. My office was in LA. We have 4 children. You mentioned Crystal and I. We were stuck in Phoenix. We were caring for my aging parents right at the time. And so what we said was we're gonna live here and raise our family here. My office was in LA, but I promised to have dinner with my wife every night and kids. So I commuted between Phoenix and LA almost every day for about 8 years, which I wouldn't recommend. It's absolutely insane, right? So I'd get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd catch a Southwest flight into LA. I'd work all day and fly back home, kiss my babies, and do it again. But anyways, 8 years of doing that. we kind of decided that sense is crazy. So we were fortunate enough to participate in the sale of the business. And I told my wife, hey, if you don't tackle me while we do this, I'll take a year off. So literally what led to some of this is I took the year of 2007 off. And my wife and I, we set 3 goals: regroup with God, each other, and the kids. So I went on 4 or 5 mission trips. This sounds exotic, but I don't mean it to. We packed up the family, moved to Europe. We rented a place in Berlin, and it was really just to regroup, just to hang out. I'm going to tell you, so, side note on leadership: if you want your family to like you, take your kids to a place where they don't speak the language, they don't have any friends, they can't watch TV. All of a sudden, you're pretty cool, and they can kind of hang out with you some. So that's what we did. I loved it. We came back, as you mentioned. I got into venture capital, which is really where we'd say, hey, we buy small businesses, grow them, and then sell them. Nothing that's going to be on the cover of Forbes. Our goal was to, grow some business and make a living, but I was also coaching high school baseball for my family. So I really tried to engineer a lifestyle that enabled me some of the flexibility to do what we wanted to do. Ran that for another 7. And then what we did is that year we took off. That year that we went abroad and we took a whole year and regrouped up. Phil, it was so transformational for my faith, for my marriage, for my relationship, that my wife and I have decided that we try to figure out a way to take a year off every 7, right? So I took '07 off, 14 rolled around. I actually went to my senior pastor at the church I was attending and just said, hey, I'd love an opportunity to kind of serve the church. I think I actually said something like, I'm not sure what job a Jesus Loving Venture Capital applies for. Like, I'm not sure what position in the church that guy gets, but I'd love to try it. And I was very, very fortunate that the leadership at the church brought me on, and it was great. And they said, hey, listen, first of all, what he said was, I don't even know what venture capital means, right? And I said, I buy a company, I grow it, and I sell it. And I remember him saying, well, listen, obviously you can't sell us, but if you want to come on and bring those skill sets around growth to the church, that I can use. And my little tangent is, as I landed then towards church a little bit, was I would have never done that, Phil, if he had said, hey, drop your toolbox, go back to seminary, figure out how to preach, and then we can figure out how to use you. So I give kudos. If you're talking to us about leadership, I give kudos to them of that leadership of taking what skills I had and figuring out how to deploy them for the kingdom, right, in some way. But anyways, came on board, thought I might stay for a year or so. I ended up staying for 5, which is great. Stepped away at the end of 5, kind of prepping what our next season's going to look like. Weird thing, like COVID hit, and we're sitting there, we're trying to figure out what to do. And long and short, I'll tell you a little bit more of that story. But then a lot of what we had built for one church, we found was really a need for a lot of churches. Yeah. So then we spun up a company called Studio C, which is what I'm running right now. And it was really to take all of those lessons, right? If I were to tee it up, the engagement management I learned at Mercedes, the targeted messaging I learned at the agency, the scalability I learned in venture capital, and then the kingdom I learned at church. And I bundled all that stuff together into Studio C, which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and that's really where we engaged, I think for the first time. A mutual friend introduced us, and he said, hey, I got this friend. He's got both this business experience. He's also been a high-level leader at a big church, and he has this thing in his heart that he's trying to figure out whether this would be helpful for churches.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. And I remember that call to this day, and it was, I'm most thankful that it introduced me to you, and we could become great friends and brothers in Christ. But it was also very fun and exciting to see you walking through that. Take me back to just that moment where you've got this concept.
Yeah.
And you're a guy that had a lot of other big options. You could have gone out and made a lot of money in the world. You could have done a lot of things. Like, walk me through a little bit of, I have this concept, and I would say you were kind of talking to me about proof of concept, if you will, and talk a little bit about, to the people that are out there either planting a church or starting something in ministry, that are in that moment where you're like, I don't even know if this is going to work. Should I do this or not?
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you that's interesting because I do balance both of these. By nature, what comes naturally to me is to have a strategic plan, right? To go out there and I actually use a business plan or a strategic plan, whatever you want to call those things, to flush out the idea for me. I don't expect to have the full idea to do it. But then there's this other side that says, man, I'm sensing something and I want to be obedient to what I felt was a calling. And it's the idea of trying to merge both of those together is what really kind of happened here. the little bit of contextual background, when I joined the church and I started working for a church, honestly, very simply, what I said is I just went through what I did typically with a venture capital. You acquire a company and you look for gaps, holes that are missing, so you can fill those holes. The organization grows and you can sell it. So I just looked in a church and I started looking at where I thought there were gaps, right? And one of the gaps that I found is if I go through like a marketing plan and I look at the product and I look at the placement and I look at the promotion and I try to understand how clear and how solid it is. When I got to a church, I said, okay, we've got great clarity around our product. And I know somebody in the church world is going to be offended that I use that, but I'm trying to put it into some layman's terms of this. But we have a weekend experience, we have small group, we had serving. The product was pretty clear. Then you look at the placement, which is the distribution channel. How do we get the product in the hands of the people? Well, we had campuses and we had online and we had a really clear distribution channel or placement. And then I got to promotions. How do we tell the whole world how to consume this awesome product called salvation? And man, it was the Wild West. Everybody's just shooting messages to everybody. There was no strategy. There was no consistency. So one of the first things I said is, hey, we're going to bring some structure to this idea of promoting this, both through our members and to prospects and all these things in an intelligent way. I always say I brought the science of messaging to the industry of church.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we do this? So anyways, this is the play that I'm running at the church. I've now stepped aside. While I was at the church, quite honestly, just because of the size of our church, we would have a number of visiting pastors that would come in. Right. And I would just meet with them and I'd say, okay, hey, here's what we do to target our messaging and send very relevant messages to people to get them engaged and grow in their faith and point them to next steps in their discipleship journey they're not taking. And we'd run this play and how we did it. Well, then when I stepped away from the church and COVID hit, I'm actually trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. So my wife and I are trying to figure it out. And we tried, honestly, we did all kinds of things. Like we did vision boards. I'm not sure if anybody's ever done that. I wasn't a fan in theory, and then I did it. And I loved it. And you got a picture. My wife throws out a bunch of magazines on the table and said, hey, we're going to cut out pictures like third graders and paint them to a board. And it's going to visualize where we want to be over this next 7-year course. And unbelievably, what popped out of that was this yearning to continue to serve the kingdom, right? I wanted to use my tool belt, but I wanted to continue to serve the kingdom, even if I wasn't employed in the church. So honestly, that was helpful in and of itself. And then as COVID's hitting, I started getting these phone calls from churches. Now, I'm no longer employed at the church, but I'm getting these phone calls from pastors that had come in previously and visited with us. And they said, hey, when we were with you, you talked about getting the right message to the right person at the right time and on the right channel. And he said, we lost our stage. We don't even know where our people are. We don't know how to communicate to them. We're certainly not communicating in a relevant way. We're just blasting a message out. And the question was usually something like, hey, can you email me like a widget? Could you send me a little thing? And I would laugh and I'd say, guys, I'll send you whatever I have, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's technology and there's strategy and there's all this stuff. And long and short, that team that I built to manage all of that at our church, we called it our studio team. So I kept saying to my wife regularly, man, Chris, the Big C church needs a studio team now more than ever. The ability to know where people are and message them, that needs to happen on the Big C level. So honestly, that's where Studio C, even as a name, came from. So the vision boarding and my wife saying, hey, listen, buddy, maybe that's a little nudge from God. If you're getting 50 phone calls to talk about this, maybe put some money in a bucket and go start this thing. So that was the origination of it, Phil, was this idea of trying to be obedient to kind of the vision God's doing for me, and then significant demand in the market saying, we got to talk to our people in a purposeful way.
I love that. And I love the process that you used. Like, what is God calling us to do?
Yeah.
What is our mission? What has he done in my life before that to build those competencies in me and those passions? And then how do I deploy that, in the church and to help grow the church? What's my piece of that? For the rest of us, tell me this. For the rest of us, you have a great way of describing, we throw around member engagement. And I think me and the others don't really, we say that like we know what we're doing, but you actually understand it. Simplify that if you can for the rest of us. Like, what do you mean by member engagement, and why is that important?
Sure. So I think, one of the things that I've always I've always taken or frequently taken is that if I walk into an organization, and this comes out of my venture capital world, and they usually give you these PowerPoint decks that are about, this thick, and they're talking about why they're worth $1 billion. And I usually stop and I just say, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you draw the customer journey on a piece of paper for me? Can you just fit it on a page and tell me what that journey looks like? Then I'll understand what your business is. Well, when I got to the church, I tried to do the same thing. I said, hey, what's our job as a church? And can I understand it to a depth that I can draw it on a piece of paper? And so the idea was just take the customer, what we in the marketplace call the customer life cycle. I don't know you. How do I know you? How do you buy the product? And how do I retain you and keep working with you? And then how do I convince you to bring other people in? And I just applied that to church. And it wasn't a stretch. And so I just said, hey, our job as a church is take somebody at the top, I call them a not yet Christian, and to work them through some life cycle, some member engagement cycle, some discipleship journey. We have all these words that mean the same thing. I want to take a not yet Christian all the way down until they become a fully committed follower or disciple. And then all I said was, okay, if that's what our job is, to take not yet Christian and make him a disciple and encourage him to go out and bring other people, what are the pieces inside of that member journey and how good are we at it? So genuinely, when I got to the church, I asked two questions. What's our job and are we any good? Okay, so this is our job, and then I put the pieces to measure for any good. So our thing as we went together was, how do I help churches move their members intelligently through this customer life cycle, through this member life cycle? And member engagement is, how do I get them to take a step in that journey that they haven't taken yet in the most relevant way? So oversimplified, we help churches move their members through their journey, through their life cycle to become a fully committed follower of Christ.
That's great. And I think that I'm sure the idea of next steps, getting someone to take a next step, knowing where they're at, which step they should be taking, and did they take it or not, and what's in their way, I think is something that we can all resonate with, that even if those of us like myself that are not versed in communications or marketing in any kind of a competency way. So that's amazing.
Well, go ahead. So I was just going to say, what's really unique about that, Phil, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We had a little lag right there. What's really unique about this that I love is that once we help them identify what the journey is, or if they may even have their own journey, there is actually stuff you can do, tactical stuff. And I always say, all your job then now is to know where people are in that journey, match them intelligently to something that makes sense for them, right? So if your next step is to be baptized, why would I be talking to you about leading a small group at this stage? Right? And if my journey next step is to start serving, why are you talking to me about getting into a group? I'm already in a group, right? I'm already doing something. So all we say is, we just want you to know where they're at. We're going to use data to map them or match them to something that makes sense, and then give you a platform to tell you how to take that step. It's kind of that simple. Now, we use technology to do that at scale. Ideally, you can do it in person if you're small enough, right? I'd stand out front. I'd say, hey, Phil, how are you doing? By the way, are you in group? And are you serving? And I'd ask you all these questions, and then I'd talk with you a little bit. And based on your rhythm of life or what you're doing, I'd point you to something. And my distribution is a physical conversation. Well, when you start growing and you can't have that conversation at scale, we just needed a digital version of that conversation. So that's what we built technically.
Yeah. And I think, something people might be thinking right now listening is, hey, this sounds very structured, sounds very, I'll use this word, business-like. And explain to us, how it empowers and, kind of blend those worlds. Because I know you approach this and the whole intent is to be a very spiritual process, if you will.
Yeah.
But you used the word structure earlier, which I think is a word that we talk a lot about at Focus 412, and people have a reaction to some of these conversations. And I'm always struggle to try to help build that bridge to make sure that people don't lose a great tool to reach people because they think it's not spiritual or it's void of. So anything you'd want to share about that piece of it to encourage people?
Yeah, I think there's some, I'll talk about it from a philosophical perspective or a methodology perspective, and then we can even talk about it sort of technically and why and when we do this. I'm a big believer that structure and certainly technology should be submissive to a methodology. Okay, and that methodology was actually given to us. Make disciples, send them to all the nations, right? He gave us the mission statement. It sounds crazy, but I think every church in America could have the same mission statement. I know we spend a ton of time doing this, but they really could. My job is make disciples, send them to all the nations. He gave us one of those clear, clean. If you read any book on writing a mission statement, that's about the best one that you can write that's out there. So anyways, the methodology is there. Everything we're doing from a structure is submissive to that, with the design to help do it more efficiently and more effectively. So that's all I looked at, is how can we do this effective and how can we afford to do it? So we need to make it efficient as well with scale. And then we build behind that. What I'd always tell my staff is, hey, if you're looking to use this data or this structure because it's something you want, we're going to question it. If it's a way that you can shepherd the people better and you can do your job more effectively, then that's what we're going to look for. So we always say it's what we want for the people, not for us, right?
Right.
And not from them.
Right.
So I think that's a big starting point when you look at either building a structure and or sort of a technology to support the structure, is really what's the intent behind it. And the intent behind it was to have the most personalized, interactive discipleship journey you possibly can while still trying to do that at scale.
Well, Grace and I would like to thank you because we have the Studio C solution at our church, and it's something to celebrate when I don't receive a lot of notifications about. Grace and I are excited to be empty nesters, and when we get stuff about, Super Summer Blast and things like that prior to the solution, we would get a lot of things.
Yeah,
We're part of an amazing Church of the Highlands, an amazing, vibrant church, incredible
great church.
pastor.
Yeah,
Pastor Chris Hodges and Tammy Hodge. I mean, I could go on forever, but
me too.
so there's so much going on. And when you're really wanting to be connected and to engage in things, when you have a lot going on and you hear all of it, it's very hard to distinguish, where to plug in and what to do next. And we've seen the transformation to receiving things that are relative to us and to where we're at, who we are, and what our next steps, might be to grow deeper. So
Oh,
we see the fruit, firsthand. And obviously Focus 412 works with a number of churches that have implemented your solution, and we see the shift. I'd love to hear, when people hear, like, it sounds like an amazing story, and in this quick format like we've laid it out, because we all know a lot happened.
yeah,
We've left a lot out, and one of the things we probably left out is some of the challenges. I always love for leaders to share, some challenges and what that felt like, and then what they
yeah.
kind of, how they interpreted or solved those problems. So I'd love if you could share, something about, and it doesn't have to specifically be in this journey of Studio C, but just in your leadership journey, what are some of the tough spots you've had to fight through, and how did you get through those, that maybe somebody else could be helped by that?
Yeah, that's great. It's a neat one to hear you say that. I think, and I'll start even on the Studio C side, is that one has to decide if they're trying to just push a product or if they're trying to sort of educate a market. And in this case, we weren't trying to just push a product. Again, I mentioned to you the product, we ran the play called Let's Know Our Members, match them to what's important to them, and then give them relevant message to point to it. We ran that without any technology for a number of years. It's hard to scale that. Technology allows us to scale it. So we're not just trying to tell you, when we used to sell cars, I don't have to educate you on the value of a car. Most people understand that. I just got to convince you to buy mine instead of his, right? In some ways, it's a little bit easier. This was different. We weren't just trying to get you to buy a product. We're trying to educate the market. And so I think early on, even in the planning, if you don't spend enough energy to figure out what you're willing to invest to educate a market so they're prepared to make an intelligent decision with regards to using your stuff, then you're going to run out of capital pretty soon. So that was one of the struggles even on this was, hey, convincing, whoever that was from a shareholder perspective to say, hey, there's going to be a fair amount of what I'm going to call consultation. And you've been really helpful. So Phil, you guys go out and you do this all the time with churches anyways. I've said this to you, and I'm not just saying it. If I get them to meet with you first before they ever come to me, I do that every single time, right? If we could do that, because there's this educating about what it takes to grow, right? And so literally what we tried to say is a lot of churches, which I'm grateful, want to grow. They want to grow the kingdom. They want to bring more people to Christ. And there's a belief that, hey, I'm going to focus more on marketing then so that I can go out and do this. Well, what I'm a proponent of is that saying, hey, you still have to do some of that, but you should really focus on your existing members and then turn them into an army of advocates that are going to go out and bring people to Christ for us. Right? We use that in the marketplace at Mercedes, actually. We would spend about $1,200 in advertising to bring somebody new into the product. Mm-hmm. Once they bought a car, we'd spend about $300 to get them to love us, right? Ride and drives or swag, et cetera. If we did a good job doing that, on average, they brought 4 people into Mercedes for us, right? So you spend 25% of the money, you get 4x the ROI. So what we have to do is start talking and spending a fair amount of time educating people to say, yes, this is a growth strategy by focusing on your members. and you actually will grow faster. There's no ad I could ever build that's going to convert as well as Phil going to his neighbor and saying, you should come try my church, and here's
Yeah.
why. So what I have to do, and that was a real hurdle to overcome, is you've got to have that story and get people to understand that before you can ever even introduce them to your product. So educating the market has always been one that is, I think, a harder thing. A lot of people think I get to just hang a sign out and they will come, right? And that's certainly not always the case.
Yeah.
In the church space specifically, and then I'll broaden it out for us a little bit, but in the church space specifically, there was a little bit of this misnomer that marketing is manipulation. When I first started, so this is 2015, working there, I wasn't even allowed to use the word. That department I mentioned to you that we call the studio team, I first called it the agency. And just like a marketing agency, I brought it in and, I got so much blowback, Phil, you wouldn't believe it. Like, you can't do marketing agency and stuff at church. It's boxing out the spirit. It's all these things. So one of my first tasks to the person that works here with us at Studio C is I came here and I said, hey, I need you to rebrand this. Call it something, anything other than marketing and agency, right? I'm going to run the same play. We're going to do the same type of stuff. We just got to call it. So we called it the studio team because it meant nothing. It was a benign statement, right? But I had to educate actually and commit or convince people that we weren't trying to manipulate people. We were using tools like knowing who they are and guiding them through a tailored process and communicating to them relevantly. That all fits under this thing called marketing, right? Or messaging, if that makes one feel comfortable. It's the same kind of idea. So we had to really get over this hurdle of saying marketing's not manipulation, using data is not a sin, right? You can go through, and for me to know where you are, Phil, and to support you with a journey that's relevant to you, I need data to do that. I need to understand where you're at. I need to understand where you're headed. I need to understand a little bit of demographics about where you've come from, all of that, so that I can craft a really purposeful shepherding guide for you. But in order to do that, I need data. But it's not a sin that I use that data to do this. So these were a little bit of the re-educating and the overcoming that we had to do, especially when we were starting Studio C.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So what has been the toughest thing, launching and scaling Studio C? What has been the kind of the most difficult challenge of that?
I think no matter what, still one of the biggest challenges has been getting alignment even within our customer base. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. So we actually ended up creating what we call an alignment workshop, where we'll come in with churches and we'll sit down together and get a lot of their key members together. So this could be the head of ministries, head of campuses, executive team, you name it, get them on board and getting them aligned on the same objective. So here's the analogy that I often use, probably overused, but I was a bit of a World War II buff. I enjoy watching it. And I thought for years I had this misnomer that Normandy was like this perfect beach to launch the invasion for the Allies. And I was just curious, like, how did they find it? How did they know this? And so I started reading about it and studying. What I found out is it wasn't that it was the perfect beach. And in fact, there were so many options that the Germans had to spread out their defenses. That was part of the strategy. The key to the objective to the launch was that we got everybody pointed on the same beachfront. And they're talking about, I don't remember the numbers, so don't quote me. This was like 7,000 planes and 11,000 ships and, I don't know how many tens of thousands of men and everything, but all on the same objective. And then as I was reading, they were saying that they cut off communications for like 3 or 4 days before the invasion. So you had skippers of boats that hadn't talked to their boss for 3 days, but yet they all knew the objective. They knew the beachfront. They knew where they were headed. And so the key for me is get everybody pointed on the same beachfront. So what has been a hurdle sometimes is you bring these churches in and you got a lot of really well-intended people hitting different beaches, right? They're working hard, but they're going in different directions. So one of the benefits that I've seen, it's been a hurdle to overcome, is if we can get those people in the room and you can use something like this, you see this massive alignment that can take place. And it's been sort of the hidden little surprise for me that I've loved about this, is just watching this alignment take place.
That's so good. That's so good. We at Focus 412 kind of believe that the best development happens in the context of relationships.
Yeah.
I would love to hear, it's a question that I ask everybody that comes on to spend time with us. Who is someone who's played a pivotal role in your growth as a leader, and what is something very practical that they did to help you grow? And it can be when you were 5 years old or 5 minutes ago.
I had, when I was in that program with Daimler, I was very grateful. It was a black belt program, right? So you really are there to learn. The intent behind the program is we're going to launch you out into learn this massive organization, 450,000 employees, right? And then eventually you'll come back to your home country and you'll be not only prepared, but you'll have great networks to do that.
Right.
Right. So during that, you're assigned a mentor the entire period. And I had a gentleman, his name was George Bauer, and was my mentor. And I'll still never forget. So I'm very young. I don't want to oversell this. I was a very, very young junior executive in the organization. But there was two lessons, very practical lessons that I remember doing. At one point, he had a bunch of us together, and we were all from different countries. He got us all together, and we'd literally, in our hotel rooms, we do these trainings every quarter or so. We'd get together, and there was a note that said, go to conference room A and just follow the instructions. So you go in there. I've never met these other people. Okay. And on this, it said, hey, there's newspapers over in the corner of the room. Your job right now is to read the newspapers, and they were from that day, and find out what's going on in the world that could affect Daimler-Benz, and then prepare a presentation for the board of directors. So I've never met anybody, and I'm standing there, and I went over to the papers, and I looked at them, and they're in 5 different languages. Okay, so I remember looking at these people and I was like, well, I've got English and German. I don't even know what this language is. I don't even know what this is. And so some guy was like, well, that's Farsi and that's Greek and that's this. And so we figured it out. And so literally at one point, I just grabbed some highlighters and I was like, well, what if we just each read our papers that we can read? We highlight financial issues in pink and, strategic or environmental issues in yellow and so on and so forth. And then we got together and we figured out what our presentation was. At the end of it, he came up to me and he said, hey, here's what you did well. And here's what I would encourage you with. The whole point of this was you're never going to be the guy that can read all 5 languages, metaphorically. You're never going to be the guy that can take all the information, ingest it, create the perfect plan and deliver it. You're going to have to rely on other people to do this. And as a leader, the skill that he encouraged me to hone was the ability to take those skills of all these other people and quarterback them, right? And figure out how to get the lessons out of it. And so that I've taken that lesson for 30 years now, right? Since then, and said, hey, I can't, I've been running a technology company and I couldn't write a line of code to save my life. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm not a developer. I'm not a technologist, but I've got a guy who can write code circles around people or whatever that looks like, and some of this, my job is to make sure that we're all pointed on the same beachfront. We understand where we are. We're motivated to do it. But that lesson, I'm telling you, it's lived with me for quite a long time.
That's so great. That's so great. So I know folks can get a hold of you on the website, right? Which is, everybody write this down, thestudioc.org. So thestudioc.org, you can find it. If you can't, reach out to us and we'll help you find it. And from my understanding and my learning and watching this solution grow and help, not just help churches, but help people that churches are helping has been amazing. And I think the thing I would want you all to know is that it's not just for big churches. Blue has actually scaled this intentionally for churches of all sizes to be able to use. So it's very much structured that way, and they will help you in every way. So thank you for your time today, Blue. I would love for you to close us out by sharing just a word of encouragement with anybody who's listening today. Just as a leader, I'm sure you've been encouraged throughout your life and your career, but just give us a bit of encouragement as we close out our time together.
First of all, thank you also for having me on, Phil. I think you've always been incredibly generous with whatever's going on in your head, and it's brilliant, but your wisdom and your insights into that, and then of course something like this, having people on. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I would say if there was one thing that all early leaders, and I'm going to say whether you're starting a ministry or starting a business and you're in startup mode, I don't care what anybody says, there's always a sense of apprehension, right? That apprehension just exists. Am I qualified? Will the market buy it? You mentioned it at the very beginning. I had to come to you and test it because I was apprehensive. Is this something that's in demand? Is it, necessary? Am I pricing it appropriately? Whatever that might be. And I think that apprehension is natural. God even tells us that there will be fears, but then he tells us not to fear that because we have him, right? So what I'd say is that apprehension is going to be normal. You should expect to see it. But then I think there's some really tactical things you can do to overcome. And the first one that I found, and I know this sounds crazy, is you start by starting. You just start doing. Yeah. The hardest dollar in a business that you'll ever earn, in my opinion, is the first dollar, right, as you go through. And I think what happens is when you get into something, there's always 2 pieces. And you mentioned this. To me, there is, what I'll call the mental piece. There's the idea. And then there's the practical piece, the thing. It always starts with the idea. We had an idea and I'm not sure. And you go through. The problem is that people often get so stuck in perfecting the idea, they forget to move to the practical. And I say move to the practical as soon as you feel confident. I tell people I want to be 80% confident I'm heading in the right direction. I'm going to start doing.
Yeah.
I'll figure out the last 20% along the way. If I wait till I'm 100% comfortable, the moment will have passed and I'm gone. So what I always tell people is you've got to make the practical obedient to the idea. So if our goal is to get in shape, then I'm going to start working out, and I'm going to make the workout obedient to the idea that I want to be in shape as I'm formulating the strategy. If my goal is to write music, start writing, right? If you're doing this, in this case, if your goal is to start a business or a ministry, start doing, and that'll actually move you really quickly into what you need to see, and you can adjust along.
That's so encouraging. Well, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Phil.